Hey everybody, welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus here once again. I'm in Krakow, Poland. Behind me is the royal apartments of Warwell Castle, biggest castle in Poland. And as you just saw, I had up some images of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp memorial museum here in southeast Poland. And this was one of the most intense places I've ever been to. It could be the most intense place. And there's a lot to talk about with this subject. I want to talk about the kind of emotional energy that comes with a place like this and its effect on me, and how that relates on I guess a metaphysical level. How that concept plays into the big picture of things we talk about here. And some maybe even found those little video clips I put at the beginning to be a bit difficult to stomach, just given the context of what it is that we're looking at. And that is what's interesting about this subject, because if you just saw those video clips by themselves and there was no context, if you didn't know what you were looking at, would you have had a reaction to it? Would it have caused you to feel any kind of gut-wrenching sensation? Or does the context matter? And if somebody is if somebody is an energy sensitive, would they be able to feel something from those images or any images in a place like that, even without knowing what the context is? Now, I can't really call myself a true sensitive, because probably if I walked into a place like those barracks and I didn't know what had gone on there, it's unlikely that I would connect to that energy as much. Whereas I do know that there are some people who have the ability to do that. They can go into a place like that and right away feel like that something is wrong, that something really bad has happened. And people can do that about just one person, who maybe lost their life in a building or was murdered. But imagine when we're dealing with not even thousands of people, but hundreds of thousands of people. And that's what we're dealing with in a place like Auschwitz. And that's why this is such a, mind-bending place to go to. And I truly wonder what would happen if a sensitive were to go to a place like that. And I imagine that they just wouldn't even, that they wouldn't risk going to a place like that to begin with. But before we go further, I have more to talk about with this subject. You are watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. We talk about the supernatural. We talk about energy. We talk about the unseen effects on our lives in this world that come from other dimensions. That's the big topic here. And if you like this kind of stuff, please go down and hit that subscribe button, as well as making sure that little notification bell is colored in. It's not grayed out, because that's the only way YouTube will let you know when I have new videos coming out. So to continue, a little background, with Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was always a place I wanted to go to, maybe just to test my own abilities to go into a place like that. And I'm extremely happy that I did, because the actual energy in that place, I think, is more about the memorialization. So, over decades, millions of people have set foot in that camp. The camp is very well preserved from, even dating back to its original use. And yet, really what the profound sadness that comes out of that place. I mean, it's that's part of the preservation process. So in a way, going there is you want to experience the powerful emotions that come with the place, because that is how what happened is memorialized, is etched into time. In Auschwitz, it was a death camp, and if you've seen the film Schindler's List, part of Auschwitz was featured in that film, and that was a good representation of some of the things happening in the camp. But it defies imagination, and it always has defied imagination, just what went on in there, and it makes all of us question the nature of humanity and just how dark and evil parts of this world can be, and how something like that can happen here in this plane of existence. It makes you begin to question the nature of this world that we're in, just how bad it really is that people could be capable of something like that. So, in Auschwitz, basically, one of the craziest places that I saw there was the ruins in the Birkenau complex, the ruins of the crematoriums, not crematoriums / gas chambers. Everybody knows about this subject and what went on there. But just to give you a quick refamiliarization, Jews and undesirables from all over Europe, all across Europe, as far west as France, were sent by train to the center of the Holocaust, which was Auschwitz, and there were concentration camps all over the region. But Auschwitz was the biggest and the central focal point of the Holocaust. And the trains were coming in there to Birkenau, which included the images you saw that I put up in the video. And it was coming in every single day, huge shipments of prisoners. And they'd get off the train, and then there would be a Nazi doctor giving people quick lookovers to see if they're fit for work. And if he nods to his left, then the prisoner would become a labor prisoner and would effectively be in the camp to work until they die. If they nod to the right, then the person would be immediately executed. But these are trains coming in with 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 prisoners at a time. And about 70% of those prisoners were not fit for work because there was women and children, older women, younger children, older men. And so 70% were nodded to the left. And they went down the road of death. Now, most of these prisoners had no idea because the whole process was designed to happen in secret. So, because they didn't want to arouse suspicion, panic, or cause the prisoners to do an uprising. So they all believed that they had no idea they were walking to their death, and so they were taken into what was supposed to be like a showering and sanitation room, and they kept the illusion going up so much that they had towel racks for all the prisoners. And they said, put your clothes here, so you can get them when you're done with the disinfectant. The Nazi officers stayed in the gas chamber right up until the end to reassure the people that nothing funny was going on. It wasn't, it was exactly like they said. They'd get disinfected to make sure that they weren't bringing in lice to the camp, and they'd be able to shower, and then that's it. So then they left the camp. Finally, they closed the doors behind them. And the Nazi exterminators, wearing a big white smock and a gas mask, they went to the upper chambers of the gas chamber, and they applied a very specific amount of Zyklon B, which is originally designed. The actual purpose of Zyklon B was to save lives by eliminating parasites and pests and lice and and fleas and things like that. So, a lot of the Cyclone B was actually supplied by agencies like the Red Cross, thinking that they were helping to eliminate infections and infectious diseases in camps. But the Nazis found a way to use that to exterminate the undesirables. So they opened up a can of the Zyklon B, applied it to the pipes, and when that gas began being funneled into the chamber, it was so powerful that half of the people immediately died. Half. They just fell dead right there, and the other half took a lot longer to die, up to 20 minutes. And that was the horrific, painful process. And this was all mostly kids, children, women, children, and older men. And that's the terror that they all suffered. And most of the time, they had no idea that they were going to die, up until they realized they couldn't breathe because they were being suffocated by the gas. And something I learned that was very interesting from my tour guide was the way that she was implying that, as horrible as this sounds, in some way you could say that they had the merciful thing done to them. They didn't know they were going to die. And for many of them, it was instant, instantly just unconscious. That was it. Compare that to the people who were nudged to the left. To the left. And they went into the Birkenau work camps or the Auschwitz work camps. You see, the purpose of those camps was still to kill the prisoners. It would be a prolonged death, suffering with typhus and horrible diseases, working 15, 16-hour days in mining camps and things like that in the outskirts and the periphery of Auschwitz, and being given about 350 calories per day. So this was another strategic design by the Nazis to kill the population. So they had just enough food to be able to keep working while slowly withering away. And once they withered away enough, via the starvation, then they had the excuse to send them to the gas chambers or to firing, to killing yards where they were shot, or to the Auschwitz hospital where basically they'd be inspected to see if they could still work. And if not, then they'd be injected with a chemical to the heart to kill them. But it often wasn't an instant death. It was a long, prolonged, painful death. And that was the bastardization of hospitals in places like Auschwitz, was to not to heal people, but to inspect people and determine if they are still fit to work or not. Because the whole purpose of the camp was to exterminate races that the Nazis didn't want in Europe. And as in the summer of 1944 was the most horrific of all the years in Auschwitz, and that's about the time that many of the Nazis knew they were losing the war. But they figured, hey, if we're going to lose the war, we should at least try to finish the job so that we can still save the European people from the undesirables, from predominantly Jews, but also Roma people, Gypsies, and some other races, and political undesirables. So they sped the whole process up and amplified the amount of people coming into Birkenau until it was just thousands of people a day being gassed to death. And there was a queue, and so people would sometimes end up like in the barracks I showed at the beginning of the video, where they had to basically wait in line to be gassed because it was just going all day. And they had hundreds of slave laborers coming in to clean up the dead bodies after each gassing, so that they could keep the illusion going on between each killing that it was a disinfectant chamber, it was a shower. So they had to use powerful deodorants and all kinds of chemicals to wash the place down after each session, to make it ready for the next. And there was a long queue, so there'd be a new train coming in, and they'd have to get it ready for the next line of people. And then at the same time, they were getting all the ashes distributed in the the rivers or the lakes, or maybe it's lakes, ponds around the camp, or being sent into the air through the chimneys, in the crematoriums. And as I was saying, even if you were sent to the work camp, all that means is that instead of dying instantly, it was a long, prolonged horror. So 90% of the people, at least 90% of the Jews sent to Auschwitz, didn't make it. And that means including from the extermination facilities and also from the actual workers themselves. Altogether, about 1.1 million were sent to Auschwitz, and that's just Jews alone. And 1 million lost their lives. So that eventually would have been everybody, but the camp was liberated. So I guess some like 80,000 or 100,000 people did survive the camp. But even if you became a forced laborer, the idea was that you would eventually die. That was the whole point behind it. It's just that something very strong. So people with I guess the greatest mental fortitude and physical fortitude were able to outlast what was the intention, which was for them to die. And so that's why we have survivors from Auschwitz, because not everybody. Some people survived, it's just that the odds were badly against you. So some could argue that the more merciful thing was just to be taken out immediately and not endure, the horror of life inside the camp. So all that being said, what is it like to visit Auschwitz and see all of that? For me, one of the most gripping things I saw was something you're not allowed to take photos of, which is there's a chamber, and it's filled with human hair. So the hair that's cut right off of the dead bodies. It happens right after the extermination occurs inside of the chamber, and all of the slaves, they come in and pull out any gold teeth, cut off the hair, and basically just finish the complete robbery of their bodies. And the hair was sold to German companies who participated in the Holocaust, because they decided they could use the hair as a textile product and make products for the German people made out of human hair. And so in the museum, they even had a carpet made from human hair that one of these companies made. And I also have heard about Nazi officers having like lampshades made of flayed skin and things like that. So it's just evil beyond imagination. And it reinforces to me the polarity, the polarity of light and darkness, and how that polarity can go into like the depths of depravity that are unimaginable, and that level of unimaginable depravity manifests on this plane where there is entropy and where people are vulnerable to each other. Other planes of existence, as we learn about in this channel, are not so vulnerable to entropy. It's not possible necessarily to use physical force to enslave people when you have mental control of your surroundings. In a place like this, though, when that dark spectrum manifests, then it becomes something that can control and enslave and commit something like this. Although such evil and such horror, I believe, certainly exists in other realms as well. But there it is almost impotent in a way, because such evil can only feed off of each other. They have very limited abilities to do what they really want to do, which is to prey on the innocent. Although there are dark entities that can do that, and they can get into our minds, they can give us, nightmares and try to attack us, and even some, ghost hunters have experienced being attacked by entities. There's phenomena of shadow people, which are sometimes negative entities, which have been known to mess with us, and all of this, dates back to the kind of theological, biblical stuff about negative entities that they call demons, and how those creatures must be combated using spiritual principles, especially how we think, how we feel, projecting those thoughts outward and inward, and living on a higher spectrum, a higher vibration where such things are not able to harm us. because although these dark powers are more impotent, I believe, in higher planes of existence, it doesn't mean that they're useless. They all the time their main skill is temptation, pulling people into their web. Sociopaths are experts of manipulating people to fall into their traps, and they still do that on that side. Or they can even use, I believe, physical force against us, even on that side, among the people who don't realize or understand that they can be immune to those types of things if they just change the way they think, or if they don't allow, if they don't provide consent. Because certainly, as we've discussed in this page, on this channel, like experiences in other realms, experiences in spiritual dimensions that are outside of this body can still look and feel very physical, and so you can still be physically, deal with the physical manifestation of evil like that. But the biggest danger is among people who don't understand that they can fight back against this type of thing very easily by just expanding their consciousness. So we saw all this, I think, with the Nazi Party. A level of profound depravity, profound evil. The purpose was to inflict extreme psychological darkness on people. And to go back to that difference between the people who are in the camps, and the people who are laborers, and then the people who were sent straight to the gas chambers. Those sent straight to the gas chambers, when we think about the context of the afterlife, what happens if you're the fortunate half who instantly succumbs to that gas? You just immediately pass out and you don't wake up. Well, there's undoubtedly would have been countless people living on the other side to help them facilitate what just happened, and very mercifully ease them into their transition, probably removing them from the site of what happened as quickly as possible, so they wouldn't see or experience what was happening around them. Because once you're out of your body, you won't even know you're out of your body. Sometimes you just you'd be able to see all the horror happening around you in the gas chamber, and that suddenly you'd be like, "What's happening? I feel fine. I don't feel, I'm not suffocating, and I feel great. But why everybody around me is like screaming and dying?" And that alone, of course, would be a horrific thing to see. And so if I had to guess, the kind of, the way to deal with that situation is to make sure that the person who crosses over in a situation like that is not conscious. Many accounts of people who have passed away, or even people who have had NDEs, but especially spirit communication talks about people crossing over unconscious. So their consciousness on that side hasn't woken up yet. They pass away here, and they're completely asleep, and then they, at the appropriate time, they wake up on that side, and that's especially important, I think, in a situation like that. So most likely, the probably thousands of guides and people trying to clean up in that horrible mess that was happening in Auschwitz were all working there behind the scenes to do whatever they could to minimize the damage and make sure that the people crossing over were not even exposed to the psychological damage that could have been caused by seeing what was happening, so that everybody would have a chance to be carefully taken out. And it's literal. I mean, you leave your body, and then there's your duplicate. You have a duplicate that comes out of the original body, and they'd have to be probably taken through portals, or however it is they do it, into other realms as quickly as possible. And you can just imagine the amount of work that would be involved with that. Just endless, dealing with that horror every single day from the other spectrum, from the other side. Trying to minimize as much damage as possible to those souls crossing over. Yet, over on the labor side, you can imagine that the task may have been way more difficult, because now the people are being exposed to untold psychological damage. Really, really extreme situations with a lot of, let's say, psychological effects that could harm or traumatize somebody. And the people who pass away from those conditions may require much more help. They may be traumatized. They may be terrified in ways that wouldn't happen if they were just quickly transitioned. And so again, you can imagine the amount of work that would have had to have been involved. So that's an interesting, that was just some thoughts I had from the spiritual perspective. But, what's really interesting is that, when the camp was liberated by the Soviets, it became a museum almost immediately. It became a museum in 1947, and the first people operating that museum were survivors of the camp. Actual prisoners themselves became the tour guides, and that was also how information about what had happened in the camp was quickly propagated out disseminated, I should say, out to the public. So even the people who survived all that, some people were, on a mission themselves, on a kind of spiritual mission to having gone through all that, and then deciding to basically live and work around that camp for many years to help spread information about what happened. So that's very powerful too. So anyway, I left there and I felt, I really felt overwhelmed. And I came back to my hostel, I fell asleep, and of course, I had like 2 straight hours of like crazy dreams about what I just experienced, about the subject, and exploring different angles of it through my dreams. Like one dream involved trying to conceptualize what you would do in the modern day situation if this were happening, how you would hide, how you would get away. And so I was exploring that, possibly with some other people in the dream. This is, being facilitated, as all dreams are, by your higher self, and exploring different dimensions of how something like this happens, including how to escape, how to get away, what the best strategy would be, where do you hide, how do you become aware of something like this when it's about to happen. All these are different ideas and the possibilities of this happening again in the modern age. So my higher self was creating all of these scenarios in my dreams that afternoon. Overall, I'm very happy I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau because it absolutely was something that just, jolts you into perspective. The intense energies and the power of that place. For those, who have the guts to go there and check it out and experience that museum, I absolutely recommend it. In fact, I would go back there without a guide, just so I could wander around myself and absorb more of what happened and to help empathize with this, this blight on human history. So I do recommend it. I think that's all I have for this video, but I wanted to talk about that, and there's a lot to talk about in this subject. But if you like this kind of stuff, head to afterlifetopics.com. You can check out my books like Understanding Life After Death or The Afterlife and Beyond. My most recent book came out last year. You can join the Facebook group, and if you want to get involved in the private classes or just donate and help keep this work going, help keep this message going, the information out there, then you can head to the Patreon, patreon.com/afterlifetopics, and get involved in the private interviews, the private classes, all that stuff we have for patrons. So anything like that's always appreciated, or you can just book maybe a coaching session with me. Anything like that always helps. Well,